Start off. Hello, my name is Keith Stanley. I'm the executive director of the Near Side Partners, joined by a very special guest today to really focus in on this housing issue that many people have been talking about. Joe, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Joe Peterangelo. I'm a senior researcher with the Wisconsin Policy Forum.
Joe, you said senior research analyst, you mentioned researcher, you mentioned Wisconsin Policy Forum. For those of us who are just regular, the average Joe,
Yeah.
what is the Wisconsin Policy Forum and what do you do at the Wisconsin Policy Forum?
Yeah, so the Wisconsin Policy Forum is a nonprofit research organization. We study issues, local issues in Milwaukee and statewide issues. We have offices in Madison and Milwaukee, but we're a nonpartisan group. So we're kind of an independent group. We take a look at an issue like affordable housing. We'll analyze it. We put out reports, get our research findings out there into the community, into the media, and try to influence conversations among public officials and elected officials. And so I'm a researcher there. I've been there for almost 10 years, actually.
You want me asking, where did you get where did you go for undergrad?
I went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington for undergrad. I'm from Wisconsin, but I moved out to Washington for college. And I studied environmental studies out there, and then I moved back to Wisconsin and ended up eventually going to grad school at UWM in urban planning. So that's how I got the job at the Wisconsin Policy Forum right after grad school.
Not bad. And you mentioned housing, and that's what we're talking about today. I wonder if we could transition a little bit and go into this housing. It's been at the top of mind for the Near West Side and for many of our residents. And I'm curious, what has Wisconsin Policy Forum done as far as it comes to research? And then what is your research showing when it comes to housing in the Near West Side? So I think you got a slide presentation.
I do, yeah. And to introduce it, I mean, the work that we've done on housing is pretty big picture so far. It's really, so we've done two big studies recently. The first one was trying to understand what the city of Milwaukee does when it comes to housing, because the city has a lot of different programs, and we tried to get a handle on understanding where the city's putting its dollars, what kinds of programs it's offering, what are some of the priorities that they seem to be focusing on at the city, and look for ways that maybe things could improve at the city. And then we did a second report where we looked at the nonprofit sector and the private developers of affordable housing. So that was mainly a survey and interview project where we just tried, again, to understand who does what, how they do it, how they pay for it, who they're targeting in the work that they're doing. So I can share some of the findings from that. And we won't have a lot that's really specific to the Near West Side. So it's very kind of citywide perspective, but yeah, I'll start sharing my.
No problem. Let's go right ahead and take a look at that.
Cool. So this first study we did, like I said, was really focused on the city, and we started by looking at some of the housing challenges in the city, and this helps you understand what the city is doing in terms of the programs it provides and the what it's doing with its housing dollars.
I hear that term rent burden household.
Rent burden.
You might be going to this. So please forgive me. What is the rent burden households?
Yeah, so a rent burden household, typically the standard is that people shouldn't spend more than 30% of their income on rent. So when you spend more than 30% of your income on rent, you're considered rent burdened. And here you see that Milwaukee residents are more likely to be rent burdened than people throughout the state and nation. So more households spending over 30% of their income on rent. And that's one way of looking at this. this is another way of looking at it, because this is really a much bigger challenge for the lowest income households. And Milwaukee, really what's driving a lot of the affordable housing challenges in Milwaukee is the prevalence of very low incomes. And so here you see that almost a third of renter households earn less than $20,000 per year. And for them to be able to afford their rent, essentially with an income of under 20,000 a year, your rent would have to be 500 or less per month. And that's, a very low rent. And it's not very common to find a rent like that. Only 9.5% of all the rental units in the city are at that rental rate. And they're mostly studio apartments. So they're not really, designed for families to live in. So a lot of households, this is meant to show that really a lot of households are spending more than they can afford on their rent, oftentimes even half of their income going to rent. Another big issue in Milwaukee, and this surprised me, I didn't know this was kind of trending in this way, but if you look back over the last 15 years or so, the home ownership rate has gone down pretty significantly. So this is looking at the percentage of housing units that are owner occupied, and it's gone from almost half in 2005 down to only 40% in 2019. So
And
a big drop there.
John, I would say this. I think about this quite a lot in the work that we do in the near west side. Driving into work, I take 17th Street in. I live on Fond du Lac, and I take 7th Street in, 17th Street going southbound, and I drive past, I think it's Lindsay Heights. Beautiful neighborhood near 17th and Walnut. Some great people, a lot of African American families there, homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I drive past, I see beautiful, well-maintained homes in Lindsay Heights. And it really bothers me that, to see this number continue to drop. I think for our city, for it to be healthy, I would say that we need to always increase home ownership. But specifically, I don't know if you have any numbers, we need to increase home ownership within the African American community. And
Yeah,
I would
actually,
imagine these numbers show that. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, yeah, that was my next slide is, the disparities in home ownership by race are pretty stark. Here you see that, just, almost, it's basically double the rate of home ownership among white households and black households in Milwaukee. So yeah, exactly like you said, it's especially a big issue for the black population. And I think, the foreclosure crisis and the Great Recession, I think that disproportionately affected black households, and that played into this. But yeah, certainly a big challenge, and something that I think needs to be prioritized in the city. And then, one other thing is, among those who do own their homes, a lot of the housing stock in Milwaukee is pretty old. 2/3 of the units were built before 1960. So a lot of, aging houses that need repairs, and that can be a challenge for lower income people if they own their homes, as well as just keeping up with the home maintenance. So that's some of the issues. I mean, evictions are another one. I don't have a slide here for that, but we tracked evictions, and that's been a big issue in Milwaukee. And there's been some action on that recently to try to prevent more evictions. But so there's a lot of different housing challenges. It's not just one thing when you're talking about affordable housing. But then in this first report, we tried to look
before,
at.
Joe,
Yeah,
before you get into that, I wanted to throw this out there. Is there an issue that you either tracked that you're aware of on the landlord side? To me, I have to admit, in the near west side, I am surprised by the cost of some of these rental units. We're talking about studios, efficiencies, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and we're talking about $800,000, $900,000. I'm like, for a lot of our residents, they could probably go to first or maybe second ring suburb, definitely a first ring suburb, and pay just as much with better quality. And I'm just curious, any tracking as far um, around land on the landlord side?
Yeah, we didn't look at that in our research, but I have seen other research that seems to say what you're saying, that the rents are not as different in lower income neighborhoods as you would expect compared to higher income neighborhoods. And we haven't looked at that issue specifically, but yeah, I think that there's evidence that that's true. There's been some ideas out there of how to address that, if there would be, and a lot of it is just really difficult to do. Like, I think there's been some proposals to try to set a maximum rent based on the value of a home. But I think those are things that are really challenging to do, legally, and to get. I think you would have to go through a state law change to allow that. So that's a challenge. But I do think, yeah, you have a point. So what we tried to do was try to understand, like I said, that the city, there's all these different players that are doing different things, providing different programs in Milwaukee. And so we tried to look at like these different types of services and who does what in Milwaukee. And I mean, basically what we found is that the city of Milwaukee, and when I say the city of Milwaukee, that's distinct from the housing authority. The housing authority plays a role. It mainly provides public housing and Section 8 vouchers. But a lot of what it does is it's federally funded, and they can't really, there's not a lot of discretion to decide what they do, where the city of Milwaukee gets more flexible funding coming in, and so they can kind of decide a little bit more where they put their dollars. And they also put some of their own, city funding towards housing. And so we first looked at sort of who does what to put the city in context, but then we kind of dug into the city itself. And I'm just giving you this not to kind of go through this, but just to give you an example of what we included. We showed, each program the city provides, and these are the examples of home repair programs. What agency is managing it? So we found that the Department of Neighborhood Services has programs, Department of City Development has programs, where the funding's coming from, how much funding is going into them, and who they're serving, how many households they're serving. And so we did this for each kind of type of service, to just understand what the city is doing. And what came out of that, one thing that came out of that is that the city is putting a lot of its housing dollars into these home repair programs. So the most funding is really going into those programs for lower income homeowners that need a loan to help pay for home repairs that they're having challenges paying for. Sometimes that's to meet code compliance, so it's the Department of Neighborhood Service thing that they're trying to be code compliant. Other times it's just you know wishes to make repairs to a home that's getting older and just needs repairs. But that's been a really big focus in Milwaukee. There is a lot of money the city is putting into expanding the supply of affordable housing in a lot of different ways. Sometimes they're putting money towards actually developing new units. Sometimes they have a bunch of different programs that renovate vacant units, sometimes city-owned vacant units, and sometimes it's a workforce program that's training people to learn construction trades while they're renovating these vacant homes, and then getting them out onto the market. So bringing new affordable units for either renters or home buyers in Milwaukee. So those were kind of the two biggest areas the city is focused. There's a little bit of funding going into increasing home ownership, but that's been less of a focus area for the city. And then some other types of housing services. But then we tried to understand kind of and compare Milwaukee with a couple other cities, peer cities, to kind of see how we compare and contrast and what we might learn from that. And so I'll give you some examples of that. We looked at Minneapolis and Detroit are two, and I'll show you kind of what we learned. In Minneapolis, we found they have kind of consolidated all of their housing programs into one area with a director. So we don't have a housing director at the City of Milwaukee. It's kind of, we have programs divided into three different agencies. They all do a lot more than housing. There isn't really a specific housing department or division or a housing director in Milwaukee. And so we found that as something that we might want to think about here. Like Minneapolis has a housing director overseeing all of their housing programs and policy. And so we thought that made a lot of sense. Minneapolis puts a lot more funding into affordable housing development. They have this affordable housing development fund that they've created, and they've put in like as much as 20 million a year they're putting in to this fund that then helps support creating new affordable housing. And that might be partly because Minneapolis is a stronger housing market, kind of a stronger economy. So that might be, helping them to do that in a way that Milwaukee has a harder time devoting as much to it. But we did note that. We also found that in Minnesota, the state has home repair programs. So they'll provide a loan to a homeowner in Minneapolis or wherever, as opposed to in Wisconsin, the state doesn't do that. So the city is really the main player when it comes to those home repair loans. So that might also help to explain why the city prioritizes home repair loans so much here. So that was one difference. And then another thing we thought was really interesting was that the city of Minneapolis works with the state and other big players when it comes to developing affordable housing, like other nonprofits and the county, to make sure that they're all coordinating that, they're all on the same page. So there's more of a big picture thinking about what are we doing when it comes to affordable housing and how are we each playing our roles and fitting together to making the biggest impact we can. We don't have any kind of coordination like that happening in Milwaukee. So those are some things we learned from Minneapolis. Detroit also has a housing and revitalization department. So they have a housing director at the city. Again, something we could consider doing in Milwaukee. They've also done some strategic planning around housing. We found Milwaukee doesn't have a housing plan that's really guiding all of these programs and investments the city is making in housing.
We do, Joe. Would you say, from my understanding, there's 99 neighborhoods in the city of Milwaukee. Most of them are covered by a comprehensive plan, if not all of them. And inside those comprehensive plans, usually they highlight housing. Any
Yes,
considerations or thoughts of that?
that is right. So not that there hasn't been any thinking around planning in the city there, or around housing planning. There has been, like you said, in the comprehensive plan and those area plans, but some of those are a little bit dated, and there has never been sort of a plan that comprehensively looked at housing, kind of like what is the city doing across the board with all of its dollars, all of its programs, and to try to think like, these are our main goals. This is where the need is greatest, geographically or demographically. This is where we're going to, what the strategies that we're going to focus on to try to achieve those goals, and who's going to be part of making that happen. So I know, Keith, you're involved in this new planning effort that's happening. And I was going to get to that. This came out of this research, really, that the city and the CDA are now developing a housing plan. The CDA is the Community Development Alliance. So it's local foundations, nonprofits, and the city and county are involved in that too. So we think that's a really positive thing, because not only is the city creating a housing plan, but these nonprofits and funders are involved. And so it's going to be I think a really good comprehensive way to get everyone on the same page and kind of working together towards the same goals. So that's a really positive thing I think that came out of this research. Detroit had done, similar work in developing a housing plan there. And another thing that kind of relates to the housing plan is that by doing that plan, they started to engage the private sector more, local funders, nonprofits. And so they, in different ways, they were able to bring in more funding to help support some of the work that they were doing at the city, both for home repair loans for people and for developing more affordable housing and preserving existing affordable housing. So I think that that's something that hopefully, the plan that's underway in Milwaukee will help to bring some of that kind of collaboration. The CDA is looking for ways, I think, to coordinate how funders are supporting housing in Milwaukee. And so I think that's another opportunity here.
Joe, what do you think about in both slides, and you mentioned this several times, the role of the private sector? To me, it seems like it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing that if the private sector is willing to step up and lead and help, not lead, but help us with this, is great. But it's also not a curse, but it's a foretelling of where dollars are being moved around in this country. Like there was a time when our governments could have the resources, they were well resourced to deal with these issues. It looks like now our government institutions aren't able to do it, and we have to continually depend on the kindness of the hearts of the corporations of our country. How do you feel about that? Any thoughts on that?
That's a good point. I mean, I think that um, I don't know if it's the needs have grown in Milwaukee in some ways, but I think you're right that the capacity of local governments has been really strained. I think the budgets of the city and county have been really, really tough for quite a while. And looking at the city, I think the pension, just keeping up with pensions has been a big issue. I think you know, the the police department budget is taking up basically the entire property tax levy in the city. So yeah, it starts to get to a point where some of the things that aren't, obligations that are kind of requirements become hard to do. I think that a lot of the federal funding coming in with the various relief acts have been a lifeline and have been really, really helpful. They're helping with eviction prevention when it comes to housing. I know that the city is prioritizing housing in some of the dollars that have come in from the federal relief. But yeah, no, you make a good point that over the longer term, um, are we needing to? It seems like we're needing to rely more on funders, private funders, to complement what we do in the public sector. So I'll just close with that report. Some of the findings, kind of just summarizing some of our findings, was that we thought the city should do more strategic planning and coordination across these different programs. I mean, the city had more than 20 different housing programs, 3 different agencies involved in it, and no plan. So we thought, that was one area, and there's work already happening on that. So that's really good. Engaging in the private sector more, and then I thought I had one other, but yeah, I guess we kind of covered the main points on that one. We do have the other report, and I can tell you about that. But did you have any other questions
Yeah.
on the city and its?
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I don't know if it's streamlining, but developing like one outfit that houses our housing initiatives in the city, I think is great. I think developing a strategic plan is absolutely key. Uh, but a couple things, and this is a two-sided question that may go into what you have before us now with expanding the blueprint. One is that anytime, because we've just completed a Near West Side Partners strategic plan, that you want to show have SMART goals. You know, was it? I think is short or no, SMART. I know that's an acronym for something. I can't think of it. Measurable. There's a whole bunch of, but there's an acronym for it. I can't think of it this morning, but it's a Monday. But I would imagine that you would want to have not only a plan, but you want to have a plan that has goals, that is well informed by some of the research and data that shows what the challenges are. You know, I heard this number 40,000, that we are 40,000 homes or affordable homes or units short to support housing in the city of Milwaukee. So is that a goal? You know, would that be a goal for a strategic plan? Anyway, I have to kind of throw it out there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that that would be the type of thing that hopefully would come out of the plan and I know that they've created 4 main focus areas in that plan. It's basically like 2 of them are on the renter side, 2 of them are on the home ownership side. But yeah, then within each of those, I think developing some concrete goals of, you know, whether it's units developed or, you know, preserved, affordable units preserved. I mean, I think that one thing that we can't get at in this housing plan, unfortunately, is that the income issue is such a big part of what drives housing affordability. You know, if households have more income, they can afford, you know, they're more likely to be able to afford more types of housing and more options. But you know, within the plan, I think having those four focus areas and specific objectives that we can, you know, there'll be an implementation plan, there'll be kind of ways to measure progress over time, and there'll be check-ins every year to see, like, are we making progress towards those goals? I think that's key to actually making progress.
Joe, I know you're more on the research side of things, so please forgive me if some of these questions kind of exercise the part of your brain that basically you're not using, at least with your title. Um, but do you see a future for our city to do a better job with housing? And I mean, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I think some of the things that we've talked about, I think um, just having more coordination, having more of a clear idea of what we're doing, what our priorities are, and you know, things like we have an affordable housing fund in Milwaukee, but it's so small. I think it's like $500,000 a year goes into our affordable housing fund. You know, are there ways that we can build that up? And you know, I don't know if that comes out of some of this federal relief, at least getting some of that going, or if there's ways that, you know, again, that this would potentially partnering with foundations, you know, not an ideal way to do it maybe, but it is, I think, making more of an impact with what we've got. But I think building up some of those tools that are already in place and having a clearer vision, I can see things certainly improving from where they're at right now.
I would say that a couple of things. One, I'm in the market of buying a home now, and
I've been looking a little myself too.
yes. And one thing that kind of bothers me is that as I look around throughout the city, I don't see as much diversity in the housing stock. I grew up in Sherman Park, beautiful homes, but there was a certain model, and I think it goes to that slide you present as far as the average age of these homes. You know, I kind of like the more modern style, more Frank Lloyd Wright inspired style, and it disappoints me that as I look at these neighborhoods, I don't know if it's because of maybe architecture or we just have not been investing in developing new homes. but I don't see diversity in styles of homes. I would love to see the shipping container homes. I think those are
Mhm.
so cool. And I just think that our city doesn't offer at this time the diversity of the style of homes.
Mhm.
And I say style, but style is really somewhat superficial, but just newer homes, just homes that use renewable energy more, homes that are well insulated, homes uh, um, that are facing towards the sun in a certain way, and geothermal. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that. I mean, is that just because of the age of these homes, or do you think I mean, can we see a resurgence of people? I mean, the housing market is going gangbangers. You think that there'll be people interested in, you know what, let me buy a couple lots in the city of Milwaukee and let me start producing homes because the housing market has never been hotter. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, that, like you said, that the age of the housing stock, there is, like, you see little infills here and there where people build modern homes in the city, but it's not super common. You're right. I mean, from my perspective, it seems the same way. And we only have a few neighborhoods that are still kind of developing new homes. Like there's a few neighborhoods the city is involved in, like Josie Heights, and I can't remember. There's a couple others, but there's not a whole lot of new developments because the city is built out and it's been built out for quite a while for the most part. So it's really just those little infill kind of things happening for the most part. Uh, I see a lot, you see a lot more of that if you go down to Chicago. There's,
Yes.
you're right, yeah, you see a whole huge range of housing types that we don't have, and kind of, you know,
I
newer
will,
stuff going in.
Joe, I would love to see some side by sides or brownstones, as they call them. There's only a couple areas in the city of Milwaukee that have them, but they're great because we have all this retail space that we're never going to use. Amazon and companies like Amazon have changed the way we shop, and so we just are not going to have that. And I drove past the Northridge area recently and just couldn't believe the blocks upon blocks of acres on acres of unused retail space. I'm like, this could be actually be housing. We're never going to
Mhm.
get back. We're never going to have a lot of those big box stores are just not just how we are as a country and as a society now. And I wish that we could figure out a better way to develop some of this because I think the city of Milwaukee has great areas that just are so underdeveloped and other areas that are overdeveloped.
Mm, yeah.
And it'd be great to figure out how we can support development for modern homes. That solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. So,
I
anything
think
else
that,
you would? Oh, go ahead.
just one other thing, like I think one thing that is kind of unique to Milwaukee is, and we've been looking at duplexes as that, first time home buyer looking at duplexes. And I think, Milwaukee has more duplexes than most cities. It's unusually high, share of the houses are duplexes. And that can be an opportunity for new home buyers to, have some of the mortgage being paid by a tenant. And I think that is one opportunity that makes home buying a little more affordable in Milwaukee. And I think too, like there is an idea that a lot of people who rent could be saving money by buying a house. Right now, it's really hard, right? Like the market is so hot, and houses are selling for well over their asking price. In more than half of the cases, I guess, houses are selling for over asking. And but especially as we get past this kind of pandemic and the impacts that's had on the market, I think people have an opportunity to buy a more affordable home, possibly save money, especially if it is like a duplex that you're getting some of the rent, some of the mortgage paid by a renter.
I love that model. I think that's great for our city. Allows people to help pay for their mortgage through rents, tenant rents, but it also allows them to understand what it means to be a good landlord, and and how to
Mhm.
fix things. You know, when you become a landlord, you got to kind of be a weekend warrior, as they say, and get the hammer and get the drill out and work on things. I think it's great as a society, but that's just my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, yeah, you have a good point.
uh, Joe, anything else you would add to this conversation that people should know about when it comes to what you've presented for our city regarding developing housing in our neighborhoods?
You know, I mean, I do have a few slides of this other study. It's not as much as long as the first one, but if you, I can hop through these pretty quick.
Please do.
Um, yeah, so for this second study, we surveyed nonprofits that provide housing services and developers who develop affordable housing. And we also did interviews with a subset of them to kind of ask. I mean, the point of this again was to understand who does what and how they do it, but also we asked a lot of questions about what do you see are the biggest challenges when it comes to affordable housing in Milwaukee right now, and what are some ways that we might address them. So um, again, this is a lot of information, but we collected information about what what organizations do what and how they're doing it, where they're putting their dollars. You know, a lot of the prioritization is around developing affordable housing, but also home repair. A lot of resources going into home repair programs in the nonprofit sector as well. But when we asked people to respond to rank, you know, these are different areas of housing. Where do we need to put more priority, and where do we put more funding? This is like a rank of 1 to 5. So basically, the lower the ranking, the higher they were prioritizing it. And so affordable housing development, meaning building more units, was seen as the biggest priority across this survey. It was more than half of the respondents said that should be our biggest priority. So that was one interesting finding from the survey. And then really the interviews, I just have a few kind of takeaways from those interviews when we talk to people. So a lot of people we spoke with said we should, you know, we have a lot of affordable housing, but a lot of it's really not affordable for the lowest income households. So we need to find ways to develop, and that's part of why I think this planning effort is focusing on units that are for rent of under 750 a month. So that's kind of a priority there. And then locating affordable housing near employment opportunities, near downtown, near other employment hubs in the city and suburbs where there's not a a transportation challenge of getting to jobs. We heard, home ownership is a big priority and reducing the racial gaps in home ownership. But because of the impacts of the pandemic, there's a lot of need to focus on stabilization and eviction prevention right now. And thankfully, there is a lot of federal funding that is available that's helping with that. And so once we get past that pandemic, I think really putting that focus on homeownership, finding ways to prioritize, like with the city, for example, trying to really get city-owned vacant units to be going to home buyers, local home buyers, instead of turning into rental whenever we can. That's one example of how we could prioritize home ownership. We heard that supportive housing. Are you familiar with supportive housing? So providing those services.
Near West Side, let's let you know that's where we are the backyard for the city when it comes to supportive housing.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, that was a common thing that people were pointing to a lot, is this is such an important type of housing, but we don't have any funding source. There's no sustainable funding for the services that are provided within those developments. And so the organizations that provide those services, which are for, different populations, people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, or formerly homeless individuals, those services they're scrambling from year to year to really get funding to pay for those. So that is kind of a gap and a thing that I think we need to find a solution for. And, you know, I'm not sure what that is yet, but that's something that I think we need a solution for. And we heard that the funding that is available for these home rehab and home repair projects is kind of just inadequate. It's based on, you know, it's just outdated in terms of the amount of funding that the city and county are putting towards these projects. And so the developers, the nonprofits are really struggling to make those projects work, just because there's not enough funding for each one of them. And then the last thing was around coordination. We just heard that you know, there's been some great coordination happening in Milwaukee around like eviction prevention. There's a new rental housing resource center that's you know, developed at the community advocates, where all these different organizations are working together to help households that are facing eviction to try to, you know, prevent that from happening. There's other ways that coordination of certain types of housing services are happening, but it's not really happening when it comes to, you know, all of the different organizations that are developing affordable housing or working in home repair. There's not a lot of coordination happening on that, and hopefully that's something that you know, changes in the future. But these are some of our takeaways from those interviews and that project in general. But that's what our research has covered. And if you have other questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
No, Joe, I really appreciate this. Just a few before we wrap this up. One for me, I know this is outside the scope of your research and what you've done, but I do get concerned when I hear developers who are very proactive when it comes to housing arena, and they're saying they're sharing that, you know, we get this housing done, it's almost like a silver bullet, if I can use that term. Where I'm concerned, because I think that I've seen across this city brand new developments, but yet crime is still high, poverty is still high. You know, there's no wraparound services at many of these developments. So for mental illness, addiction, physical, people have restricted physically. They're beautiful apartment buildings, beautiful housing units, but the community is still suffering. Any thoughts, insight, consideration? And this might go to what you were talking about earlier as far as wages, but any thoughts to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is, I mean, I think the challenge of, you know, everything seems to come back to Milwaukee's poverty and income challenges, and it affects so many other issues. And it's a very tough question to answer, and I don't feel like I've done, you know, really covered that in my research. Is how do we get at the income question? So I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to really answer that too well, because you're right. I think you know, it's always going to be a challenge for people to afford these places without a subsidy, unless there's the economy improves, there's better paying jobs, you know, wages rise, and so that's always going to be an underlying issue that's very closely connected to housing, transportation, and all of it. But yeah, I'm afraid I don't have the answers.
I said, no, that's good, Joe. I just want to throw it out there because I know housing is so important, and the study and research that the Wisconsin Policy Forum has put together has been really helpful with us really taking this problem and taking the reins and trying to figure out to do something about it. So, but I know that's one of many in this puzzle. So I really appreciate it.
You know, and one other thing I did want to mention is we're starting another housing study that is going to be much more on the ground, and I think it'll be pretty interesting. We're working, it's the Amani housing pilot,
Mhm.
which is, in the Amani neighborhood. It's just one block that they've been working on basically comprehensively. There's all these different groups involved in it. The Dominican Center, and Ezekiel CDC, the Northwestern Mutual Foundation, a bunch of other organizations. But we're going to be looking at that as, you know, what what is that model? They've basically been doing housing improvements across this one block, house by house, looking at what are the needs, and how can we try to make as much of an impact on this one block when it comes to housing as we can. And so what are the lessons learned from this pilot? Is that a model that we might use in other neighborhoods? So that's the next step that we're doing on the research front.
Well, Joe, I really appreciate it. It's always good to have the people doing the research well funded and well organized to help us understand and define the challenge and the problem. Before we can solve it, we got to understand it. And you guys have been at the forefront of many of Milwaukee's challenges and helping us define it. So I appreciate it. Is there anything coming out of the Wisconsin Public, the Wisconsin Policy Forum that we should be aware of? That any new studies that will be coming soon that we're going to be that you can share with us, is that you guys are working on and will be out shortly?
Yeah, shortly. Gosh, I'm trying to think. This Amani one the housing pilot I mentioned will be probably towards the end of the year. I'm not sure which ones
No,
I should talk about, but
I will say this though, because I know how that is, because you got to make sure you got to have these things lined up before you can announce. But I will say this: we would love to have you. We probably couldn't afford you guys, but we'd love to have you guys in the Near West Side, trying to help us figure out this, not just housing, but many of some of the focus areas that we've concentrated on. But you guys just do great work. I've been working with you guys, and Rob, and just you guys are some great folks. So I appreciate the work that you guys do.
yeah, we thank you, and we appreciate your interest in our work, and we'd love to work with you in the future. So don't be shy to reach out.
No problem. I won't be. Joe, take it easy and good luck with the housing search. We put an offer in, and weren't even close, and we were way above the asking price, but we weren't even close. So
yeah, I think that we're taking a step back. We've put in offers on a couple, and it hasn't worked, and I just think it's kind of crazy right now. But
exactly, I'm taking that approach. We already decided that we're going to hold back and wait, and give it a month or two just to let it die down, hopefully. So, Joe, I appreciate it, man. I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for the opportunity, man.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, you take care. Right, bye-bye.